So it's not possible to give an exact assessment of how much has leaked, but we're looking at the collection of the oil that we have done already. We've already collected about 4,000 litres of oil and water, principally oil, not water, and that looks like half of what leaked already recollected. So an estimate which is not accurate would suggest approximately 8 to 10,000 litres of heavy fuel oil which leaked from that opening that occurred as a result of the buckling and which has now been sealed and which escaped beyond the boom around the vessel.
Of course, the amount that's been collected has been collected by skimmers within the boom itself.
That's been collected both from the skimmers within the boom and from the J formation of the other boom that is going around collecting, with the vessel from Salvamento Marittimo going behind the J formation boom and collecting what is left there as well. And we hope to be able to collect as much as possible, if not all, of that oil which escaped this morning.
And what are the resources that Gibraltar has in terms of booms and skimmers? Are these sufficient, and will more be brought in from Spain and even potentially the UK?
So there are resources in Gibraltar, there are resources which are coming in from Spain and resources coming in from the United Kingdom and indeed potentially from other European nations if it were necessary in order to be able to provide resilience. You've seen that one of the reasons that the oil escaped the boom is that we have an inflatable boom, which is the most effective boom for seagoing operations of this sort, and part of that became disinflated overnight and there was an escape when this happened during the course of this morning. So you're combining all of these things to ensure that you have not just what you need, but also resilience to support further what you need is what is going to be the key going forward.
You said that it's hoped that it will be collected and there won't be any damage, but as we've seen from those images, it is stretching down a significant part of Gibraltar's coastline. Is it too late to fully contain all of it, having diffused to the extent that it has down through that coast?
Well, no, it isn't too late, but it isn't an easy operation, and I cannot give you any guarantees that we will be able to collect it all. There is no oil on Sandy Bay, there's no oil on Catalan Bay, there's no oil on Eastern Beach, and there's no oil beyond our territorial boundaries. Yes, it's a long stretch, but it's a manageable long stretch at the moment, and we're continuing to do the very best job possible in the context of the tools that are available and the technology that is available to collect this spill. Let's hope this is the only amount of spill that we have and that we don't have more spill, because it becomes very difficult for any organization in any part of the world to contain or collect oil when it becomes free in the sea. That's why the key operation is to take the oil out safely and cleanly, which is something that has already started now in respect of the diesel fuel aboard the vessel.
And in terms of that sort of sinking into the water, which the Nautilus project has raised, could be an issue. How long does the government or the authorities have to work with before this becomes an issue, before that oil sort of goes beyond the surface of the water and becomes that problem?
So remember, this is low sulfur oil. This is oil that does sink below the surface. It sinks slowly. The sooner you're able to scoop it up, the better. That's why the exercise is done both with the J-style booming and corralling of the oil and also with the skimmer that sucks it out of the sea. The answer here is any minute that passes is a minute too long. You have to be able to respond as quickly as possible. That's why the assets were already on the east side to start the process of controlling an escape if there was one, and there was one, so the assets were there and we were able to start very quickly to control it. In the maritime environment, things are not as quick as they are on land. You can't press a button and move things, so we needed to make sure that we had the assets on the east side so that the exercise could commence within a reasonable time of us detecting the spill, which is what happened.
And one of the other things that was mentioned yesterday was the possible deployment or planned deployment of other measures to protect the coastline, so not just around the ship itself, but around the coastline. How is that going?
So that's going very well. I mean, the assets are already in Gibraltar. They're already being deployed. Deployment does not just magically mean that they will appear in the area of Catalan Bay. There has to be sinkers and fasteners, etc., that are provided for. Whether things are moved through land and then deployed on Sandy Bay, whether they're moved by sea for deployment on Sandy Bay and in Catalan Bay and Eastern Beach, all of that is what is being finalized now, depending on fasteners, depending on sinkers, which are the things that will keep things where they need to be, etc. And I sincerely believe that that will be something that we can do in time to ensure that there is no lasting damage to our beaches or indeed to the coastal areas in question if there were to be, heaven forbid, another spill, which we hope to be able to prevent.
And you've mentioned that resources. Are we taking Liz Truss up on her offer of support from the UK? Are more resources being coming in from there?
Well, resources are coming from the United Kingdom, from Oil Spill Response Limited, which is the entity that's contracted to the government of Gibraltar, which is one of the best resourced entities in the world for the purposes of dealing with oil spill response. Resources are also being obtained from commercial entities in Spain and from the authorities in Spain that have offered those resources, and they're being accepted where necessary. There are a lot of resources to deal with different types of oil spills. You've got to get the right resources, otherwise you're wasting time in bringing resources which are not the right resources, and you need to use the experts in salvage to be able to determine those things, working with the captain of the port and under the direction of the captain of the port.
Now, coming back to the ongoing operations to remove diesel oil have now begun. So, what's the time frame for this? Obviously, there's a great amount of diesel oil, much on the ship, not an oil carrier, but a significant amount. How long is it expected to take?
Well, insignificant compared to a diesel carrier, but very significant in the context of a pollution to our bay and indeed to our coast on the eastern side. So we need to get it out as quickly as possible. And nobody should think that we have delayed one moment in being able to extract that oil, or that we could have done it 2 days ago, a day ago, or yesterday. We are in the process of trying to achieve this as quickly and as cleanly and as safely as possible. We're not trying to keep the diesel oil there for any reason for one moment longer than it needs to be there. But look, very roughly, the pumps aboard the vessel, which are the pumps that are used when the vessel is bunkering, you use the pump on the vessel that's supplying the bunkers and on the vessel that's receiving the bunkers. The vessel pumps pump at 15 tons an hour. So you've got 250,000 tons of diesel. Roughly, that's going to be about 16 and a half, 17 hours. My quick calculations with you now. If you can do that in an uninterrupted way, if you have to interrupt because something gets stuck or if you need to discharge, etc., then you're going to see that period of time made up either in one operation or a number of operations for us to be able to take off all the diesel first, then the heavy fuel. The heavy fuel does not move as easily as the diesel fuel. The angle of the vessel has also been relevant because of the physics of then potentially putting more stress on the hull as you remove weight from one side to the other. All of that is the process that we are still in the process of going through. We've started the process with the diesel. We'll next go to the heavy fuel oil or to the lubes, whichever we can take out first.
And how long is it expected before that removal of the fuel oil could begin?
Well, I mean, you can't remove the fuel oil until you've removed the diesel oil, because you've got one pump on the ship, and the pump is pumping at 15 tons an hour. So 16 hours, broken up as it might have to be, then another 16 hours to take out the heavy fuel oil. Those 16 hours with breaks might be 30 hours, might be longer. So you're looking at doing this in a way that doesn't itself create a problem, because if you don't do this right, remember, usually in Gibraltar, when we've had spills during the process of bunkering. We are debunkering the vessel in effect. So what we've got to make sure that we do is an operation that enables us to avoid pollution and doesn't create pollution, whilst trying to avoid the wider pollution that would be caused if we don't take the fuel off and there is a further sinking or accident of this vessel.
And in terms of that, is there any further clarity from the experts who've assessed the damage as to the breakage and the strain on the rest of the ship? Do experts believe this is expected to break further in the coming hours and days?
So we will have greater clarity on that at the SCG or GCC that is being held this afternoon at 6 p.m. We have been concentrating on the work of dealing with the small element of pollution that there has been yet, and the cleanup and the removal of the oil, and we are awaiting the assessment that was being made this morning from diving teams, etc., of the further breakage that there has been, the further crumpling there has been of the hull, and what the consequences are, therefore, for the removal operation in respect of the vessel, and indeed whether we have to have greater concerns about, in particular, tank number 1, which is the tank at the front, which is in the area which is crumpled, and whether the crumpling could affect that tank.
And in terms of that tank, is access a problem to that tank?
Well, access is not a problem in the sense that we can access it with divers. But remember that in Spa Bunker 4, which was the event in 2003-2004, where there was a problem off the refinery, they couldn't access a tank and they had to break a tank using divers and then take out the oil. In breaking the tank to take out the oil, there was already a spill, not as great a spill as if the whole tank had been open to the elements, but that creates a spill. So if possible, we want to try and pump through the existing pipework of the ship everything that's in tank number 1 back into tanks 2, 3, and 4, so that we can then take it through the systems that there are on the ship and not have to have any further leakage of oil, even if it's leakage as part of a controlled operation.
And in terms of what happened, GBC understands the captain of the ship has now been arrested. Is there any further clarity as to how this incident took place and what went wrong? We should clarify that the Royal Gibraltar Police has said someone has been arrested in relation to this, and that we understand that it is the captain of the ship. What sort of action could this result in?
Well, look, I mean, I think it's important at this stage there is an emergency in Gibraltar under the Civil Contingencies Act, and I have a role in respect of that, dealing with the resolution of this problem, not with the prosecution of anyone who may have caused it, if there is to be a prosecution, and not with the investigation of what led to it, where there is an accident investigation system. Now, all of these things, of course, are relevant to explaining internationally what has happened in Gibraltar, whilst blame is being put in Gibraltar. But in the context of how this is investigated and prosecuted, if it is, the government is not the lead authority, and it would be improper for the government to comment. To an extent, I know as much as you do about the arrest, because that is something that's been announced by the Royal Gibraltar Police independently.
And in terms of the accident itself, one question. This was an LNG tanker it collided with. What are the protocols around these manoeuvres? What sort of distance has to be kept from an LNG tanker?
Well, in the context of keeping distance from another vessel, I don't think there's too much difference between an LNG tanker, a diesel tanker, or anything else in the context of navigation. I mean, an aircraft which is carrying cargo keeps the same distance from another aircraft as an aircraft that is carrying passengers.
In terms of the potential consequences?
Well, I mean, to an extent, Christina, I don't want to be drawn back into the issues that we had big debates about in 2015 during the general election campaign. But if it had hit the LNG tanker, instead of having a problem with diesel fuel or heavy fuel, the LNG would have become gas and would have disappeared, and we would be having less of a problem. I mean, in the circumstances in which an LNG tanker can create a gaseous cloud which could combust are really, as we looked at almost 7 years ago now, in a world before Brexit, very, very statistically narrow. Here, we're dealing with a different issue. You don't want ships to collide, whatever it is that they're carrying, because the fuel that runs the ship is as much of a problem as whatever it is that the ship is carrying, and they must keep their proper distances. And from what I have seen and what I have heard, which is not part of an investigation, simply being told for the purposes of consideration of declaration of the emergency, and when it happened initially to understand what had happened, it was clear that the separations were not maintained, that VTS was giving instructions in that respect, and all of that will need to be looked at in the investigation.
And finally, can you take us through what more is expected today, obviously without being able to predict the future, but in terms of the further briefings that there will be held and how the operation is expected to roll out over the next few hours?
So I expect that there will be another meeting in about 2 hours of the Security Council considering all of the issues, the Contingency Council considering all of the issues. We will then be briefed on the latest that the captain of the port has determined in the work he's doing with the salvors and the marine engineers that the salvors are using. Also in the briefings that he may have had from the Royal Gibraltar Police, from the captain of the ship himself, from the owners of the ship, so that we can make decisions insofar as it may be relevant of what support the rest of the agencies of the government have to put at the disposal of the captain of the port for the decisions that he makes. Remember, that's what's happening here. An emergency has been declared so that the government can corral all of its agencies to the support of the decision maker, who is the captain of the port. That's what's happening here. And that's what the Contingency Council will do again at 6 o'clock, work with the captain of the port to ensure that we're putting all of our resources at his disposal to deal with this issue in the best way possible.